We're human, don't you know, just like you are. I'm Rachel Woods, HRBP turned HR coach, and in this series I explore the technicolor spectrum that is life in HR with folk in the know. Those that have been there, bought the t-shirt and have happy, to share their experiences for us all to benefit. So grab a cuppa, get comfortable, and we'll crack on. I'm delighted to welcome award-winning HR professional Sam Lee. And Sam has worked in HR for more than 20 years and has set up on her own as an independent HR consultant just this year. Always an HR generalist, she's been standalone, team-based, in leadership, working in different industries, seeing SMEs through growth, site openings, site closures, downsizing, redundancies, restructures, 2Ps in, out, and a double, whatever that is, we'll find out later. And as well as leading on ODD, cultural transformation, leadership and development programs. So she's done her fair share. She's also had her fair crack at employee relations cases as well, as I think most of us have in the past and will in the future. She's covered all areas of HR at one time or another and has seen the function change a great deal. You could say she's got both the HR t-shirt and quite the collection of baseball caps. So Sam and I got chatting about the role of HR in supporting company values and ethics. And well, does that make them the angels on the shoulder of the board or the guardians of employer branding? This is what we're going to be discussing today and maybe other things. So after a big, we're human welcome to you, Sam. Hello.
Hi there, Rachel. Nice to be here.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Before we get into all the meat of this, I'm asking all my guests to do a bit of a flashback and tell us what brought you to HR in the first place. How did you get there?
So I originally did an HND in business, and HR was the last thing on my radar. I thought it was all about tea and sympathy. And I actually avoided personnel as it was back then, right the way through to my last semester when I was told I had to do an HR module. So I was fortunate that the tutor on the HR personnel course was a brilliant HR professional and actually really opened my eyes to what HR could be. And as part of my sort of course, I needed to go on a month's outplacement with a company, and she put me in touch with ThyssenKrupp as it was at the time, and I spent a month with them back in the late 90s. And they were going through a really interesting time because they were relocating their site 200 miles away. And I saw how they really supported their workforce who were displaced and unable to relocate with them. So from an outplacement point of view, and equally recruited for the new site. So I got a real sense of HR being a real sort of drive and purpose and kind of treating people right. And even though that it was awful, they were losing their jobs, but they did it in the right way.
That's quite a nice start, isn't it? I think not all HR professionals can say the same thing, because an awful lot will come out with some very kind of galling early career. I want to say war stories, but actually probably more horror films about the things that they've perceived and the employee treatment that they've been not party to, but kind of forced into trying to manipulate or make work, or seeing organizations do the absolute bare minimum when it comes to following due procedure and employment law and the like. So I mean, ultimately I guess you find yourself a little bit lucky that you got that experience. You mentioned that you feel like HR's kind of changed quite a lot since then, or the world of HR's shifted there. What's fundamentally changed in your eyes?
I think when it changed from personnel, definitely that was a step in the right direction. And I think when I started out in my first proper role, it was more about process and transactional and sort of walking the walk and not necessarily talking the talk. And I think over the last 20 or so years, whilst the sort of phrase is still human resources, I think it's been about people. And actually not treating people as resources, but seeing them as people and treating them as individuals and thinking about the holistic side of the person as well.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? And do you think it's that organisations have changed at that level, or is HR creating its own evolution on that front?
I think when you look at the different sort of demographics in the workforce, so you've got your Gen Z, your Gen Y. I think actually it's the workforce that's kind of shaped that as well in terms of what their expectations are.
Yeah, it's funny, all these sort of categories as well, isn't it? Gen Z, Gen Y, boomers, millennials. I felt I struggled to know who's who and where they all fit. And at the same time, there's a bit in me that goes, I'm not entirely sure I like people being categorized like that. But I suppose you've got now the view, and certainly for HR teams, and if you're in talent or recruitment or succession and that kind of thing, you're looking at, there's a book, I can't remember who wrote it, The 100-Year Life. And it's just about that people are working for so much longer. And it's not, it isn't normal that everyone retires now at 65. It's not the kind of expected norm that has to happen and all the rest of it. Actually, that's been thrown out completely, hasn't it? Ultimately, you can work as long as you're capable, as long as you want to, as long as you feel that that's what you want to do. So what's that meaning for HR teams now? How are you seeing that? And also, I guess, cultures of organizations, are you seeing an impact there?
I think you mentioned that the sort of people working longer. You also have, going years ago, it used to be people would stay with an employer and they'd be there man and boy 20, 30, 40 years. I think there's a lot more sort of movement now and people are more willing to move. And I think whereas sort of HR of old didn't necessarily need to think too much about engagement in a deeper level, culture, values, and even attracting people because people came and stayed. Whereas now, because it's a lot more mobile, things like your values, your culture, your ethics are at the forefront because of your attraction and your retention strategies.
Yeah, so I think something made me bristle once. I can't remember who it was said it, and if I did, I wouldn't put them on the spot now. So I wouldn't play the whistle today. I do remember somebody once saying, "Culture is HR's job." What does that do for you right now? No.
I'm bristling too.
But is there an element of HR having an involvement in, I always remember Danone had this lovely saying, for a while it was part of one of their strategies, it was an HR strategy at one point or another, which they all lasted about a year, the actual HR strategies, until we decided to actually align them with the actual business strategy, which, but I think one of I quite liked it actually, because they called it was the culture gardeners. It's not responsible for it, certainly feeding and nourishing and gently prodding the environment to be more supportive of the right culture.
Yeah. And I think sorry, I forgot what I was going to say then. Just say that bit again. That last comment.
I know it was about this thing about HR being kind of the gardeners of the culture, as opposed to being the guardians or the police of it, more nurturing and creating the environment rather than being responsible overall.
And I think HR are kind of temperature checkers. We need to keep an eye on kind of the overall holistic culture of the organisation and make sure the checks and balances are there. It needs to be aligned to the business. But I don't think HR should be setting the culture. I think it should be encouraging and getting the conversation started. But ultimately, it's a collective of people, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And have you seen, obviously without naming too many names, or actually if it's a glowing thing, then that's fine, isn't it? Have you seen where that's worked really well? You've seen that as actually an HR team being immersed in and yet not responsible for culture? Yeah,
I say the longest job I had was 8 years, and one of the reasons I stayed there was just because of that, in terms of HR evolved and I guess nurtured the culture. They kind of did the check back from the people, from the sites, from the managers, from the staff, and then kind of replayed that back and came up with things that supported and developed that. So I really enjoyed sort of that, the way HR worked within that organisation, because it was holistic in its approach.
And you mentioned, I like the sort of temperature check analogy. So if HR is the thermometer, what's the measures? What's the things you can measure to know what's healthy in terms of a culture in an organisation?
And again, I know we get into sort of KPIs, but I think you can't go far wrong with your standard ones. Your absence is going to be key. Your retention is going to be key. Your pulse surveys or your engagement surveys. I think there are lots of different, checks and balances that it is our responsibility to report on, but also encourage discussion about, so that the conversations are had at the right level as well.
Yeah, no, that's a really, really good shout, I think. Just something I jotted down when we were talking about doing this podcast in the first place. I don't remember the context of it, but it was about conversations, and it was along the lines of, I think, what we're talking about now. You used the term using conflict for balance. Do you remember where we were going with that when we spoke about it? Because I loved it as a phrase. I must have loved it so much I wrote it down.
Yeah.
But like, oh, that's good. And then I'm looking at it now going, Why? What was that in the context of?
I think we were talking about conflict generally as part of culture, if I remember rightly. So I'm just trying to reflect back. But in terms of the fact that conflict can be positive and challenge can be positive, and actually if you've got a nurturing culture, then that's healthy, and it shouldn't be shied away from, and it shouldn't be feared, and conflict shouldn't be seen as a negative thing. And I think sometimes where you've got companies portraying or attracting people trying to make out everything's perfect, I think it's the fact that that there is another side to it. It isn't all flowers and roses and unicorns, is it?
It's a bit of a red flag, I think, if an organisation suggesting everything's perfect. I'm kind of is this Stepford's not wives, but is this Stepford's employees around? Yeah, is it too good to be true at that point? Yeah. Conflict itself, I think, is an interesting word. I think we would say they desire actual conflict in terms of like fisticuffs. I think that's the image it sort of throws up, isn't it? But healthy debate and not always agreeing, and being able to raise concerns and worries and questioning decision making, and feeding back in a healthy challenge. I can see that being immensely useful. And what's HR's role in that nowadays? I think back in the day, I think when I first started, HR's role in that was maybe to facilitate conversations, and it would inevitably turn into mediation. It wasn't handled very well. But now, what's changed? That are HR playing more of a facilitative role, but do they go beyond that? Do they go beyond in terms of encouraging that kind of? And how does that work?
Yeah, no, and I think it has changed, and I think certainly the way I do HR, it's about asking questions. So I had an example recently where one of my clients had a new member of staff, and I just happened to be sitting down with them in a meeting one-on-one, and at the end of it said, how's it going? How are you doing? And you could see the pause and kind of the eyes kind of darting left, darting right. Do I voice up or not? And it actually resulted in a really useful conversation. And actually, the individual shared that they were actually at the point of sort of despair and thinking of leaving, and actually not wanting to challenge, and kind of not being fearful of it, but just not being comfortable or confident, and knowing the individuals that they'd need to speak to, kind of played it back to them about how I thought they could perhaps approach it differently. And in fact, that individual stayed, is really happy. The role and the way the relationships were working changed because of that. And actually just that seemingly throwaway question, which actually involved, not a challenging conversation, but a difficult one for her. And I think, HR should ask the questions and shouldn't be afraid to check back and see that people are as happy as they perhaps appear.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? I suppose so one thing I noticed on occasions, it wasn't across the board, but some managers were a little bit reticent to ask those sorts of questions and give the space for the answers. And we used to talk about opening the door to healthier conversations. I think there was an element of fear that they would not just open the door, that it would be floodgates. And ultimately then they'd just get this barrage of, this is all the stuff I've been, holding in for the last however many months, years, whatever. Have you ever seen that? Has that ever been the case? Ultimately, if there's something somebody's bothered about, it's usually one really meaningful thing as opposed to a lot of little things. Or, is that perception ever right? I suppose that's the thing, isn't it? For HR to help HR professionals to help managers with that fear, which could be very real. They could have a genuine feeling that a lot's going to come out. Ultimately, a lot should come out, probably. But is it ever real that it is a lot of little things? Actually, it's probably one big theme.
I think that's interesting. I think obviously stay interviews are a thing now, and I think if you get your stay interviews right, then you get to unravel things over time. I think where you get a barrage is when you're doing an exit interview and it is too late and people just, so I can't think of many occasions where I've asked a question like that, or coached a line manager to ask such a question and literally the floodgates have opened. I think generally there tends to be themes and kind of overarching issues.
Yeah, that's the first I've heard of stay interviews. I love it. I think that's a really lovely. I mean, I've heard of grievance policies being renamed resolution policies and that kind of thing. And I think language is shifting, isn't it, a lot?
Yeah.
But stay interviews I really like because you're almost setting the tone before it's happened. And you're right, exit interviews, you're assuming they are exiting, aren't you? You're kind of just going, well, this is it, you're on your way out. And the individual's assuming then, well, you've accepted that I'm on my way out. I've got nothing to do here. I'll either not say anything or I'll give you both. This is nothing in between, I don't think. It's like, it's all right, it's all right, it's all right. Or, all right, you want to know? Boom, there it is. And yeah, but I love print. When's that? I mean, I've only been out 2 years and we didn't do stay interviews where I was. I mean, we might have called them something else. I mean, we certainly had, performance reviews and regular, and nothing should have been a surprise. And that was part of the culture.
Yeah.
But when did you notice those sort of interviews coming around?
I started introducing them as a check back when recruitment started to become challenging, and so we used them as to get feedback on the recruitment process. But then as kind of the conversations developed, so did we realise that there was an opportunity actually to touch base either month 1, month 3, month 6, month 9, however periodically, and the team was able to start noticing that actually people were talking about little niggles. And I think I quickly realised that the little niggles develop as we know, I think they evolved from being a kind of recruitment review to actually we've got an opportunity here to sort of add some real value.
Yeah. So what sort of data does that give you in terms of retention and enrichment, motivation, all that kind of stuff? What sort of data do you find is coming out of those interviews, other than these are the things that bother me, and yes, okay, if you address them, I'm going to be happier? Is there other stuff that you think actually data wise is really useful?
I started measuring attrition in year 1. And there was actually a marked difference. I think within the first 3 months it was 20%. It was something that quickly became part of the everyday, and that we did with everyone rather than a select few or key roles. But I think it's that if you get past your probation, you get past your year 1, people are more likely to stay a couple of years, and there was a real attrition problem within that first year, and certainly did notice that shifted somewhat.
What do you think was keeping them? What initiatives have been introduced that had, I mean, or was it just the nature of you took the time to ask? I mean, quite potentially that had an impact. The fact that you were asking in the first place, show me you care. Were there other initiatives you kind of put in that were been influential on that attrition rate?
Yeah, no, I think in terms, because of the feedback we were getting, we recognised that sort of the line managers, there was perhaps management and leadership opportunities in terms of development. Played tunes with the benefits package, and just general communication, really, making sure that that the lines are open and that messages were coming down and up. So yeah, I think they're a really useful tool.
Yeah, they sound amazing. I'm kicking myself now because we shouldn't. Oh, well, I can see now why you got this award, because
So, very kind.
Speaking of that, actually, how did that come about? What was the tell us about the award, because just a chance for you to blow your trumpet. Why not?
Yeah, no. So
yeah, I want to know as well. I'm nosy, so
yeah. No, it's a marketing company who they run them quite regularly, and I was approached back in the probably June, July time, and asked whether I'd like to participate. I believe I was nominated or put forward, or they found me. I'm still not 100% clear on that. So I said I'd love to be involved, and kind of wrote a kind of blog type article. And to be honest, I didn't think much more of it. I'd not been going that long. I think it was 3 months in, and then a couple of months ago, an email popped up, which I thought was a kind of spam. And luckily I did read it, and yeah, I got they awarded me the HR consultant of the year for their company. So I don't think they're announced until November, but I've got a nice shiny award, which I've quickly taken a photo of and put on my website.
Yeah.
And it's lovely. Yeah.
And that's lovely, and it's nice, isn't it, to get that kind of recognition also so early on. I think that's the thing, isn't it? It's one thing to take that leap, isn't it, to come from to go from being employed, saying, right, I'm going to go out, I'm going to go self-employed. And did you sort of do both for a while, or did you literally just take the jump and go into self-employment?
I took the jump. I left my last employed role about this time last year, and took a couple of months out for various reasons. And at the start of the year, started looking for employed roles again.
Oh, okay.
And for variety of reasons, I was getting picked, and I was sort of second. And then people started talking to me about, could you do this? Could you look at that? And I also became chartered CIPD, which had been hanging around my neck for the last 20 years. And I suddenly sat down and had a bit of an epiphany and thought, well, why not? Yeah, I'm coming up 6 months, 8th of October, I think a week tomorrow. So haven't looked back.
It's great, isn't it? And I think it's, I network a lot, and I know a lot of external HR consultants, and it seems as definitely there's a massive demand, certainly from small to mediums, that really, it doesn't justify having a full-time HR person there 100% of the time, but having someone on call, someone available and to hand when they need it, or for big projects, or for restructures, or for X, Y, Z. It's such a reassurance. And the businesses I network with, just like, they're so reliant on those businesses, whether they're one-man bands or whether they're people with a few affiliates here and there, or the franchisees like the HR department, that kind of thing. And it's just it's filling that need, isn't it? It isn't then employers having to then think about, wow, I'm gonna need an HR department or a person. Actually, if you have an HR department and a person, that's a lot of strain on one person, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think the relationship's different as an employed HR person versus almost a peer-to-peer sort of relationship. So I think actually, as a consultant, I certainly feel a lot freer, and I guess more empowered in terms of the way I work with my clients.
Yeah, I suppose I was going to ask you about that, the dynamic between yourself and the client leadership team. How fundamentally different that is, really, in terms of being an in-house HR. I suppose in my head, I'm like, well, they may be like, well, we're paying you, so you have to do what we ask. Or is it, we're paying you because we don't know what we're doing, and therefore we'll listen to your advice? I mean, which is it, one way around or the other, or?
I think it's more of the fact that they pay you, so they listen to you. I don't think it's not a case of I'm paying you, so you'll do as I say. As an employee, or as an HR employee, being in corporate, to a certain extent, you've got a boss, and they are still your employer. I certainly, whether it's me as a person or the way I do things, but certainly as a consultant, my role and my relationship is completely different with the leadership teams that I'm involved with. And whether that's because I'm as I say, I feel empowered, and equally I've been around, as we said, I've got the t-shirt, I've been around the block.
T-shirt, got the award, and the baseball caps.
So I don't know if it's the same for all, but I certainly see it as a different relationship. And actually, my view of an HR consultant as an HR consultant versus my view of one as an internal HR department is different as well, interestingly.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? So I was just thinking actually about sort of new entrants to the profession, either new entrants as in going out to be a consultant, or where I was coming from originally when I thought this might be a nice question to ask, was people coming into the world of HR, whether it's from other senior roles into this as a senior role, because I know people do that now, and a lot of HRBPs haven't grown up through the HR system, if you like. But also those that are literally, I'd love to work in HR, from college, university, whatever. So what would be, let's take both of them, actually, both examples. Someone who's new to HR, whether they've come from a more senior role or whether they're coming just into HR from the get-go, what's the best bit of advice you think, or what's the one thing they should watch out for, and what's the one thing they should really kind of try to do?
I think the one thing they should watch out is believing that you're a people nurturer. I think, if you work in HR, of course, people's a side of it, but it's more from a psychological point of view. You do have to do some nasty things sometimes. Let's be honest. So I think I think there's a danger that it can be created or sort of portrayed as a sort of fluffy environment and kind of nice, shiny, and it certainly isn't always like that.
No, I'm laughing because definitely it can be. There are some lovely bits. I'm not gonna gloss over that. There are some joyful elements to being in HR. But you're right. Yeah. You need thick skin, don't you? You need to grow a bit of a thick skin. It's not being heartless. It's just being resilient, making sure you've got that built up. I was one. I came into it with literally, I really love people, so I'll be great in HR. And don't get me wrong, I accepted extra HR responsibilities from being an office manager. So I fell into it pretty much by accident. And I thought, oh, I quite like this. But in my head, I'm like, well, it's because I really like people. That's why I'm doing all right at it. And then you go through your first redundancy process, or we go through your first disciplinary, or you see somebody that's been stealing or has been doing something really awful, and you think, I don't like people very much now. Or someone that you give some news to thinking they'll like it, and they throw it back at you. They think, I really don't like people. So it was a tough lesson for me because I came in quite naively. I think if you go through all the training and the learning and you do the stuff, maybe it's a bit different. You're a little bit more eyes open.
Yeah.
CIPD don't really teach you about, dealing with the Christmas party aftermath or that one, or the emotional side of thing. What happens when an employee dies? Yeah, that sort of stuff that, if inevitably the organization goes, we don't know what to do about this. Here, HR, you deal with it. And suddenly you're in this hugely emotive situation, and it's scary and it's weird, and there's all sorts of stuff. You see the best, you see the worst, and definitely. Yeah. So what about things that they can do? Things to look out for that make the job joyful. What was the thing that made your job, when you were in-house, what made your job?
I think it loops right back to where I came in. It's even in those tough situations where it's bad news, let's say, if you do it right and do it in the right way, then people walk away. They might not like it, but they would have felt treated right. And I think those are the moments that I kind of look back over my career and I'm most proud of, because actually at its worst, we were able to do our best.
It's funny, isn't it? It's almost magical when you don't expect it. I think it comes out of nowhere. Somebody thanks you
for making them redundant.
I was thinking, yeah, it's just like, what? Or even, through a disciplinary, they thank you for being fair or giving them airtime, and you're just like, wow, and that's really meaningful. You're right.
It's quite humbling, isn't it?
Yeah. Same question as a consultant then. What's the watch outs when you're 6 months in? What's been the biggest learn for you going into consultancy from in-house HR?
I think the biggest one is probably how different it is to what I expected it to be. And I don't quite know what I expected it to be.
I'm going to say, what's the difference?
I guess because I was employed for so long, and you kind of go along in that mindset to actually step outside of that. And I guess I probably stepped up in a different way, and would have conversations and suggest things and challenge in a way that perhaps I didn't feel empowered enough to, maybe as an employee. And I think also what surprised me is the amount of trust that's invested in you. You don't have to earn it. It's almost like, they've spoken to you, they've listened to how you do things, they've listened to what you've done, and it's like, this person can help. And that's quite refreshing.
Funny, isn't it? It's like the trust that comes with the office. The office of HR. You're instantly trustworthy and think, wow, I had a really long conversation a while ago. It's a young lady in the organization I was working in, and we were talking about building trust quickly. It was one of the measures of one of our performance measures, basically. And she had a real pickle about that, about, there's no way, because, trust has to be earned. And she's quite indignant, but also incredibly idealistic about how trust must be earned and all the rest of it. And I can remember saying to her, how about airline pilots? You've just been abroad. How long did you take to get to know that pilot before you let him fly you at 600 miles an hour in a pressurized metal tube? Or did he instantly have your trust because of his station, because of his experience, because the fact that he'd gone through all the presumed fact that he'd gone through all the, and she did actually, she did concede. It was, she went, all right, fair point. But really interesting to kind of watch the cogs like, actually, yeah. So in that sense, trust goes with the office. I guess so. yeah, I guess so when it's not done right. And there was a very long thread on LinkedIn a while ago where somebody was talking about bullying within HR, and I think that's the most horrendous. It's not the most horrendous style of bullying. Obviously, there's lots of awful styles of bullying. When you're in an organization or a structure, a function, who is anticipated and expected to be trustworthy, and there's bullying there, that's a massive betrayal, isn't it? It's
absolutely.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. It's very, so you find out as a consultant, they're like, yeah, we've seen your credentials, we've given you money, therefore we trust you. I love that. Yeah. Obviously you've earned it. You've got the accolade.
Got the award. Yep.
Absolutely, get the award out there. That's absolutely fantastic. So I'm really conscious on time. We could talk forever. So it's just too easy. I'm sure there are lots of war stories and Christmas party stories. But what I do want to do is make sure you get your chance at a shameless plug. All my guests get that at the end. So long and short, have a quick wax lyrical about what it is you do for businesses and how can people find you.
Okay, so yeah, you've thrown that one at me. I hadn't prepared it. So yeah, I work with all different types and size of businesses in my 6 months now as a consultant. So one-man bands through to supporting HR teams and leadership teams, and again across the whole sort of HR remit, I guess. So I work on a retainer basis on projects as packages, on interim, and my company is McGinn-Lee HR. So I was thinking then
we can put it in the show notes. That's fine. Yeah, we'll put it in the show notes.
And you can contact me at Samantha@McGinn-LeeHR.co.uk.
Oh, brilliant! Thank you. I love it to think of. Is McGinn a person?
McGinley was my maiden name, and Lee is my married name.
Oh, I love it. Sounds very like scalable, like it could be and associates at some point in time. So, yeah, absolutely. Got a very grown-up name. I like that.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, Sam, for coming along and talking to us. This has been really rich, actually. I think anyone that's thinking about going into HR, it's another piece of the puzzle. It's another amount of information that you can take away and have a think about and use. And it's not scaring you off. It's neither is it encouraging you, and it's making you have the right information so you can make an informed decision about your career, what you want to do next, where you want to be. You're staying, you're going, you're coming in, or you're taking on something entirely new. Who knows? If you like this, please subscribe anywhere that you are happening to listen. I think most of them have got those little bells that mean you can sign up. Certainly, if you've got this from my website, you can subscribe from there and you will get notified when a new episode is launched. It's about monthly right now, but that could change. If I have enough, then it will go to fortnightly. There you go. What's the difference between bi-weekly and fortnightly? No, that's another another thread I could go down. So thank you very much for listening, and a big fat thank you to Sam for your sharing. And yeah, thanks a lot.
Thanks, Rachel.
Cheers.